When I went back to my hometown last year, something really weird happened. It started when the neighbor across the street warned me that there was a suspicious person in the area. Apparently, someone was going around ringing people's doorbells at about 1 a.m. in the neighborhood. My neighbor said that they ignored the doorbell at first since they were in bed and it was so late. Everyone in their house was still in bed asleep and they weren't really expecting guests at that time of night. The doorbell kept ringing, so my neighbor's husband got out of the bed to see what was going on. He took his phone with him so his wife could listen. He asked through the door in a quiet voice, "Who is it? Is there some sort of emergency?" Then a man's voice responded, "I'm looking for Sara. Can you let me in?" There was no Sara in the house, or in my neighbor's family for that matter, and because it was a newly built house, there was no former resident called Sara either. So he explained this to the stranger at the door and told him to get lost. "But, I made a promise to her. I remember it well," the stranger said. "Well, I have a promise for you to remember well. If you don't go away, I'm calling the cops, okay?" The neighbor's husband called the cops anyway, because the guy outside didn't show any signs of leaving. The police arrived and the man at the door was nowhere to be seen, so the neighbor warned us to be careful, just in case he came back. We spoke about it at dinner that night, and I remember my parents were going around the house making sure that everything was locked when the sun went down. Later that night, my dad and I were in the living room watching TV. It was just after midnight. The doorbell rang. Before assuming that it was that weirdo who called at my neighbor's house, I actually went and checked. We didn't have a way to check outside like those doorbells nowadays, so I crept over to the curtains. I pulled the curtain back just enough to create a gap to look outside. Through the gap in the curtains, I saw a man wearing a hat and a big dark brown overcoat. He was also wearing boots as well. His face was hidden by the turned up collar of his overcoat. I couldn't really see his face. I watched as he pushed the doorbell again. My dad whispered to me to not get caught looking at the guy, so I immediately shut the curtain. This guy was definitely suspicious. There was no doubt. I mean, you wouldn't want to see him at your door, let me put it that way. We decided to call the police since the neighbors were already worried about the guy, but until the police arrived, we thought we would keep him busy, since last time he bolted. For about 3 straight minutes, he rang our doorbell. He was so persistent. My dad had had enough of this, so he went out into the hallway and approached the door. He stood before the frosted glass and asked, "Who are you?" "I'm the guy who promised to meet Sara." "What's your name?" Well. "Is this an emergency?" "Well, I'm here for Sara. I really want to come in." The guy just talked in circles. Of course, there was no Sara in our house either. If you told him that, though, he would just keep talking about his promise and how he remembered a promise and how he was here to meet her. It got you nowhere. While this was going on, I called the police discreetly. I wanted to see this guy get taken away, but he left before the police car arrived. We then heard knocking at the door. "Police," the officer said. We have a door in front of the actual front door to our house, you know, like a porch. I was amazed to hear the knocking from the officer on the actual front door, not the porch door. When the weird guy was at our door, I was certain that the porch door was shut and I didn't hear it open and close when he left. This door can only be opened and locked from the inside. How the hell was that possible, I wondered. It creeped me out, but my dad didn't seem to care all that much. He calmly explained the situation to the officer. He gave a really accurate description of the guy and informed the cops that this happened in the neighborhood last night. The officer said that he hadn't seen anyone suspicious in the area. This guy knew how to get away, and he knew how to get away fast. However, we did find footprints in the snow, so the cop said he would follow them to see if he could find anything. He promised that there would be an increase in patrols, and he asked us to report back to him instantly if the guy came back. He cautioned us, said to try and avoid going out alone at night and to double and triple check the doors are locked. This cop wasn't a new guy. He was older than my dad, and something about this situation had him spooked. That made me very nervous. There was something very sinister about this guy looking for Sara. My mother watched the whole thing. She was sat on the stairs. I turned to her and asked if she definitely locked the outside door. You know, that porch door I mentioned before. And she was adamant that she did. My dad could sense our nerves. He tried to laugh it off. "Don't worry, guys. Look, I'm sorry we couldn't get him this time." After we all confirmed and were happy that the doors were locked, we went to bed. I couldn't sleep much that night. I was relieved to see a police car patrolling the area at around 3 a.m. from my window there. The next day we heard that someone else in the neighborhood's doorbell rang. My dad was really angry at the police. He said that they must not be doing their jobs right if they hadn't caught the guy yet. 4 more days had passed, where others in the area reported late-night doorbell rings. Everyone said the same thing. A stranger came to their door, asking for Sara and asking to come in. He wasn't caught. The thing I find the weirdest about this is, not one person, myself and my family included, were able to describe what that man's face looked like. That stranger was the stuff of nightmares. I spent New Year's with my family and left to go back home, worried for them. About a week later, I called my mum to check in on her, and I got an update on the situation. The house across the street from us found a note in their mailbox that read, "Sarah's not here, but I found her. Thank you very much." The letters were painted by a brush, like calligraphy. I'm wondering if we'll get a thank you letter too, or what it means if we don't get one. I'm sorry it sounds like a mundane story, but imagine if it happened to you. A stranger whose face no one saw in the neighborhood going around in the dead of night and trying to talk their way into your home. I don't like it. I don't like that he found Sara either. This happened 7 years ago. After I graduated from high school, I started living alone for the first time. It wasn't like I was living in a new and strange area. I actually lived about half an hour away from my parents' house, so I knew the area quite well. I had been living alone for about 3 months, and things were going really well. I used to walk to work and back home through a local park, usually at around 6 p.m. I was always aware of my surroundings, well, at least I like to think so. I think it was this awareness that helped me to find the purse that day. I happened to look down, and just off to the side of the public path in the park was a red purse. I bent down to pick it up, and I was surprised to feel that it was heavy. There were a bunch of credit cards in there and some money, not just coins, but notes. The thought to just take the purse home and empty of its contents flashed across my mind. It wasn't a bad idea. And when you hear the end of this story, you might think to yourself, why didn't he just do that? It would have saved him a lot of trouble. But I wasn't to know what trouble I was about to get myself into. I can tell you now that the main reason why I didn't keep the purse's contents for myself was because I was kind of lonely, and I hadn't met any women since I moved. To be honest, I've never really had too much luck with the ladies. I had this romantic idea that I would just turn in the purse at the police station, and they would let me know when someone came to claim it. I thought that it was a fun idea. I didn't realize that the police station I turned it into made me fill out a bunch of forms just to hand in some lost property. But since I just picked the purse up off the ground, there was no way of being sure that anything had been taken, since I was the last one who touched it, so I understood. I didn't mind that, but I resented the fact that it created hassle and form filling out. I just wanted the meet cute. They said that I needed to fill out the forms because when the owner of the purse comes to collect it, they need to have everything on paper. They said that they would be in touch when the owner of the purse was identified. I went home romanticizing over what kind of person owned that purse and if we would ever meet. I took a bath and I started winding down for a good night's sleep. I felt that I had done my good deed for the year. Then, I heard the doorbell. Not once, but 3 times. Don't press it 3 times, that's annoying, I thought to myself. I opened the door, wondering who the hell might be out there at this time of night. It was winter, and to my surprise, a real beauty was stood outside, wearing a miniskirt. A red miniskirt. I said, "Hey, what's up? What's your name?" "I lost my purse, and I thought that maybe..." "Oh yeah, I'm the guy who found your purse," I said. I couldn't believe my luck. I was shocked by the beauty of the person at my door. "Yeah, I have all the papers from the police station. It should be all the proof you need. I swear, I didn't take anything from it. I'm not that kind of guy, actually." "Oh yeah, if you could just wait there just a second, I'll go and get the paperwork they gave me and we'll sort it all out." I left the frame of the door and I headed back into my apartment to grab the paperwork from the countertop, and as I turned around to go back to the door, I saw the owner of the purse basically face to face with me in my own apartment. She just walked on in. I was really shocked. I hadn't offered her in. Seemed kind of rude, you know? Our proximity was insanely close. Our faces were nearly touching. "Aren't you kind?" A smile crept across her lips as she released those words. "Well, you know, I'd want a stranger to do the same for me, I guess," I said. One word that could sum up the experience was eerie. Really eerie. I almost lost focus for a few minutes. My head was swimming. It wasn't normal. "Well, thank the Lord for kind people, eh?" The smile seemed completely painted on at this point. I didn't like the situation. It was almost like she was being sarcastic and mocking the generosity and kindness I was trying to show her. "Listen, it's kind of late," I said, trying to drop a hint. It really freaked me out. I didn't even want to be alone in my own apartment after the visit from that stranger. I managed to usher her out of the door, and I hoped that would be the last I'd ever see of her. About 3 days later, something dawned on me. The police said that they would be in touch as soon as the owner of the purse made contact. Something about that played on my mind, so I went to the police station a couple of days later to find out if the owner of the purse had been in touch. I went in and asked the officer I made the initial report with if someone had been in touch to claim the purse, and to basically ask why I wasn't contacted and why my address was handed over without my say-so. I had time to think about the situation, and to be honest, I was kind of annoyed. What the officer said shocked me. "The owner of that purse hasn't been in touch." So the police didn't give out my address, I guess. The only way that someone would have known about the purse, me finding it, and my address was if someone was watching me, and if someone followed me. It seems as if the owner of that purse dropped it in the park and waited for someone to pick it up. I mean, that's the only way, right? The police were never contacted, so how? It really creeped me out. I didn't like to think about it, and I still don't like to think about it. I just want to forget about it. About a year later, I had almost forgotten about it all. I was walking home through the park. I used to avoid the park, but I thought it was fine since so much time had passed. I saw the same woman in the same red miniskirt, hiding, well, attempting to hide behind a telephone pole, staring at me, watching everything I was doing. I haven't gone anywhere near that park since that day. She watched me and waited for me to pick up that purse, and then watched from someplace hidden to figure out where I live. For what? I have no idea. Even today, when I see a red miniskirt, it brings out a less than positive reaction in me. When I was in the 3rd grade, my sister and I were addicted to this game called Mother 2. It's known as Earthbound in the States. We lived in the countryside of Japan, Miyazaki. I hated the family rules we had as kids. We weren't allowed to play video games all that much. We were allowed no more than 3 hours over the course of the weekend. My mum would take the SNES away from us once our time was up. It would be shut away in the living room. I couldn't stand it. I needed to keep playing the game. We were very fortunate enough to have 2 SNES systems, and if you aren't familiar with that, it's just an old school gaming console. Yes, that makes me old. Since I had a SNES console in my bedroom, all I had to do was sneak into the living room once I was sure my mum was asleep, to retrieve the game, pop it in my console, and I was away. So one night I got the game and I was playing Mother 2 with my sister in the bedroom. My sister would usually give me advice while eating sweets and chocolate that she snuck from the fridge. She was 2 years older than me, so I was grateful for her input when I got stuck. I remember that night I was stuck at a particularly difficult part of the game, and it was late. I guess that it was about 1 a.m. I was struggling and concentrating. Then my sister suddenly said in a hushed voice, "Turn the TV off, bro." I didn't get why she said this, so I replied, "Why? Are you sleepy or something? Hang on a minute, just let me beat this guy and then I'll save it, okay?" "You don't have to turn off the game. Just turn off the TV," she replied. I looked at her, and she was staring at the curtains. She looked worried. I was a little scared. It was dark and my sister was whispering. I asked her what was happening, and her breathy reply made me shudder a little. "I can hear footsteps in the garden." We have gravel surrounding our house, so it's always easy to hear when someone's in the garden walking around out there. My bedroom was on the ground floor. I had been so absorbed in my game that I hadn't even noticed the sound of footsteps. Thankfully, my sister did. I shut off the TV. I listened carefully to the crunching of the gravel. It was definitely audible. It sounded like it was coming from the back garden. I was really scared. I sheepishly asked my sister if she thought it could be a cat or a dog out there, and she didn't answer. We both sat there silently, staring towards the bedroom curtains. My sister then sharply turned around and looked at me with their eyes widened, and I realized that the footsteps were coming towards the window. I was so frightened at this point I clung to my sister's waist. Then after a couple of moments, we heard a voice. "Excuse me." The owner of that voice was undoubtedly female, since the tone was quite high. My sister said nothing, and I closed my eyes and I just hugged her tighter. "You're awake, right? I'm in a lot of trouble and I really need your help. Could you open the door?" What the hell time of night was this to call at someone's house? It was really frightening for us. I felt like it was a bad dream, like it wasn't normal at all. After what felt like no more than a few seconds, I heard the dull thud and tap of fingers against the window. She was just the other side of our window. When neither of us responded, the stranger outside began to test the window frame for access points. I remember hearing the window shake and praying that it would hold out. Just as soon as the stranger's probing hands began to prise the window open, my sister rose to her feet. She broke free of my grasp and ran to our mother's room. She was shouting, "Mom, someone's trying to get in through the window!" She turned on the lights as she ran through the hallway, and the lights in my mum's bedroom. We both burst in there, and my mother was still asleep at this point. Oh, by the way, we had no father growing up since we're in a single-parent family. Our mum was really shocked to be woken up that late. I feel sorry for her. She was working every hour God sent her back then. She thought that my sister and I had had a nightmare, so she just told us to go back to sleep. She didn't even remove her sleep mask at first. She told us to go back to sleep no matter how many times we protested. Then we heard the doorbell ring. Well, that made Mum sit up in bed, bolt upright. She hurried to the front door and flipped on the porch light. That was when we got a glimpse of the stranger outside. I remember that she was definitely wearing red, Even though we had frosted glass, I could see what she was wearing. It was too short to see through the peephole, and this was decades before those, Ring doorbells came out. "Who are you?" my mother asked through the door. "Sorry it's so late. It's just I was looking for a payphone, but I couldn't find one anywhere. Of course, I wouldn't usually come to a stranger's house in the day, much less at night. It's just I have some urgent business I need to attend to. I'm so lucky that someone answered the door. Thank you. If you could just let me in, to use your phone, I'll be on my way again. Thank you. Thank you so much again." "I'm sorry, but I don't let people I don't know in my house this time of night," my mum replied. She normally would let someone use the phone, but never this late at night. It's really dangerous to allow a stranger into your home anyway, especially at night. We never usually had people visit since we lived way out in the middle of nowhere. It was very jarring to see a silhouette of someone out on the porch that late. "I hate to ask, but I really need to use your phone. I'm in a bad situation at the moment," the stranger said. But my mother stood her ground and said, "I'm very sorry, but you're going to have to try somewhere else." The woman outside went quiet, and it felt like my mum had got the message through to the stranger. But then I saw that the stranger was pulling an umbrella out from the umbrella stand. Then we heard a thunderous bang against the glass. The stranger was trying to smash her way into the house. She was using the metal tip of the umbrella to smash against the glass. I just froze. I never thought that anything like this could happen in our quiet little lives. My mother shouted that she was going to call the police. I had never heard her shout like that. It was really powerful. It wasn't powerful enough to make the stranger stop trying to smash in the door, though. My mum turned to us and said, "You two, get to the living room now and call the police." I still couldn't move. My sister had to grab me by my hand and drag me away. It all happened so fast. I remember running to the living room, looking over my shoulder at my mum, still hearing the crashing of the umbrella against the glass. My mum was making a barricade. She was dragging the shoe cabinet and putting it against the door. I think she must have been panicking too. We got into the living room and turned the lights on. I instinctively crawled under the table to try and hide. I will just remind you, I was like 8 years old at this point. My sister was on the phone to the police, and when she finished, she climbed under the table with me, and we hugged. We were shaking. And then she started to cry. After a short while, my mum came into the living room. We could still hear the sound of the glass being pounded out in the hallway. My mum was holding the biggest knife we had from our kitchen. She was saying, "It's okay, Mum's here, it's gonna be okay." My mum's face was as white as snow and teeming with sweat. She was also shaking. Things looked very far from okay. The noise from the front door wasn't dying down either. The stranger seemed determined to get in. But then, the banging suddenly ceased. The house stood still in silence. My mum slowly rose to her feet and began walking towards the front door. And that was when we heard the loudest bang of the night so far. The same thundering sound we had heard at the front door was now coming from the living room window. We all screamed, and it felt as if I was about to pass out. Apparently the stranger gave up on the front door and came round to the living room, presumably because the lights were on in there. My mother then walked to the window and spoke to the stranger. "If you want to stay out there, then stay out there, but the police will be here any second." She seemed to no longer fear the stranger or the situation. She threw open the curtains and then yelped. A short, sharp scream. I instinctively wanted to see what had caused her to yelp like that, so I crawled out from under the table and looked out of the window. Well, there wasn't a woman out there. There was a man. He had a thick beard and messy hair, and he was wearing a red one-piece dress. He stood there smiling the most insane smile I had ever seen. He was clearly delighted by how much terror he had caused our family. He then started screaming at us about how he was the Messiah and how everyone would learn about his power. It didn't make sense. It was utterly terrifying. Sometimes I can still see his face at night. He then just ran off into the darkness. He shouted Messiah a bunch of times, which can mean a number of words in Japan here, but I kind of think he was calling himself the Messiah. I think he was probably a religious fanatic. Even though we saw him leave, we were still terrified. We all cried together. The police took so long to get here. It was the worst. I remember thinking, just let me go to sleep. I couldn't believe how long it took to get someone to our house. If that guy hadn't ran off, then he mightn't have gotten in. And then, who knows what would have happened. Like I said, we were in the countryside, so I guess that's why it took so long. Looking back on this with older eyes, I can guess that he took the appearance of a woman to try and gain access to our home. It was part of his plot, to try and trick people into allowing him in. He had the wherewithal to concoct that story about the phone, so I don't think he was entirely crazy. After that night, we slept in the same bedroom for about a year. I asked my mum on several occasions if the police ever got in touch to say they caught the guy, or if they found a reason or motive for his attack on our home. But she never heard anything back from the police. For all we know, the guy's still out there. That night was the worst night of my life. This happened when I was a kid. I remember that it happened just after we had dinner, and I was in the living room relaxing when I heard the doorbell. I was 10 years old, and I for some reason was always the one to go answer the door. My parents worked late, and it was usually me, my younger brother, and my grandparents at home, weeknights. Our front door had frosted glass, but you could see through it enough to recognize people. I guessed that there was a woman at the door. I wondered if it was a neighbor, and I just opened the door without thinking. Behind the door was an elderly woman I hadn't ever seen before. The old woman offered no greeting. She just said, "Buy this book for 1,000 yen. 1,000 yen is just over $7. She held the book in front of her with her arms outstretched towards me. I was really puzzled. I didn't know what to say. I heard my grandfather coming towards the front door, and when he arrived at the door, she repeated the same phrase, "Buy this book for 1,000 yen. I couldn't get my head around something. Why would anyone want to buy a dirty old book for that price when they could go to a bookshop and get a new one? I was only 10 years old, but I knew enough to distrust the woman at that age. But to my surprise, my grandfather whipped out his wallet and said, "Okay, I'll buy it for 1,000 yen. I couldn't believe this. It was just a bad deal. I thought he was acting stupid. And as soon as he handed over the money to the old lady, she smiled, and her smile genuinely creeped me out. Although it sounds mundane, it's positively chilling. The old woman then said, "That's great. The red cat won't come out." I couldn't make head or tails of what was happening. They were both acting so strangely. She turned and left, and I made a confused face to my grandfather. He was watching her leave, and he didn't notice me. I looked at the book, and it was just a cheap-looking detective novel. I asked my grandpa outright, "Why did you do that? You know that book isn't worth that price. Why'd you even want it?" "If I didn't buy it, I think we would have had some trouble," he replied. I asked him what he meant, and at first I don't think he wanted to tell me, but I wouldn't drop it. I persisted. "Well, she mentioned the red cat, and the red cat refers to arson or pyromania. It's slang. It's very old slang. So my grandpa was paying for our house not to be targeted for a deliberate fire. The next day I was eager to tell my friends about what happened. and that was when I found out that our house wasn't the only house that was visited by the strange old lady. My friends and I went around school at lunchtime, asking anyone we could find if they got visited by the old woman. There were over 20 kids who said that she came to their family's door. They didn't even live near one another. It seemed like the old lady was picking houses arbitrarily. There was no pattern to the houses she chose. Some were on the outskirts of town and some were right in the middle. I guess that's so she can avoid police or neighborhood associations or something, not sure. Our family have lived in that home for decades and no one has ever seen that woman again at the door. I didn't hear about any arrests or crimes in my area, but arson happens. It was wise of my grandpa to pay her off because I wouldn't want a person like that to have a grudge against our family. She targeted different areas of our district, and I imagine she did this in other districts too. My grandfather, who has long since passed, said at the time, "If you can buy security for 1,000 yen, it's cheap." I was really lucky he understood what she was implying. I just wanted to add something to this story and give a little detail on that word and its etymology. It seems to be from the Meiji period, and it even existed in the Edo period. So, why is it called the Red Cat? Now, this is a rather unpleasant theory, and I will say it's a superstition. Tread carefully if you're easily upset. It cannot be said that there's any truth in this, but I think it's worth sharing. So, back in those days, a live cat was set on fire and thrown into a family home by someone who had a grudge against the family. And as the cat ran rampant around the home, it engulfed the house in flames and its fur looked red, so therefore it got called the Red Cat. Now, I don't know if that's the case, but it certainly makes sense if the word is used for arson. Very mysterious. It happened at around 2:30 a.m. It was a weird and mysterious experience. I heard this strange metallic sound, and I opened my eyes. My bed had a metal frame, and it was made of this aluminium piping, so I thought that it could have been that was making the noise. It didn't sound right though. It sounded louder than my little bed, and it sounded further away. I began to wonder if I had just dreamed it. So I turned on my lights and I looked around for the source of the sound, but I couldn't find anything. Something made that noise and I couldn't figure out what did it. I was too tired to get up and properly look around, so I just hit the lights and laid back down on my bed. I shut my eyes and I couldn't sleep. I was now wide awake. Then outside my apartment door I heard some noise. I could tell that someone was near the elevator in the hallway. What's going on? I wondered. It was so late and it was really unusual. Let me just explain. I live on the 5th floor of an apartment block, and there is only one door besides mine that leads to a small company office, and there was never usually anyone in the building that late, so there was no reason for anyone to be on my floor that late at night if I hadn't invited them. There was someone out there for sure. I could hear them shuffling around. It was faint, but they were walking around. On the odd occasion, a drunk guy would get off the lift at the wrong floor and then they would stomp about or even talk to themselves and quickly get back in the lift. Whoever was out there was walking around very quietly, and it seemed deliberate. Something dawned on me when I realized this. Because I have the only apartment up on this floor and no neighbors, I felt safe enough to leave it unlocked. It's really stupid, I know. Moments after my realization, I heard the door to my apartment open. It opened very quickly and quietly, and a person walked in. I could see them, dimly lit by the light of the elevator emergency sign. It was a woman. It was so dark, and I couldn't see that well, but I saw enough to know that she was really thin and really tall. She looked like she had the traits to be a model in the dark. She had long hair, and I believe she was wearing black slacks and a white blouse. I could only see the contours of her face, but I could tell she was good looking. I had no idea who she was. At this point, things are flashing through my mind a mile a minute. Did she come to the wrong apartment by mistake? Is she about to rob the place? Is anyone else out there with her? Despite all these thoughts and the fact that a total stranger had just brazenly walked into my apartment as quietly as she could for some reason, I was not scared or angry. I was calm. Was this a ghost? Unlikely. Ghosts don't open doors in the movies, I guess. Then I thought, maybe it's a food delivery thing and they got the address mixed up, but why would they walk on in? Hello? The woman called out. Who are you? I replied as calmly as possible. I had a weapon by the side of my bed. I slowly moved my hand until I was touching it with my fingers. Since the room was pitch black, I was certain that the woman wouldn't see me do this. I made a mistake, she said, and I noticed by the tone she wasn't a native speaker. She slipped out of my apartment silently. The sound of the door closing was so quiet I barely heard it. That made me worry. This is what could happen if you forget to lock your doors. I don't know what she was looking for or what she would have done if I didn't ask her who she was, but there was something very sinister and cunning about the way that she was walking around outside and how deliberately quiet she had been in coming and going